Good morning. My name is Tiffany Johannes, and I am your 2023 Canopy Realtor Association, Canopy MLS, and Canopy Housing Foundation President. 2023 is off to a racing start, and there's little doubt you and your clients are experiencing a much different market than even a few months ago. What trends are on the horizon, and how can we best prepare to continue to serve our buyers and sellers with their real estate needs? To explore this question, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Jessica Lautz from the National Association of Realtors, who is going to present some very interesting findings from national reports and surveys and share the 9 trends that will be affecting our market this year. Before we get started, I want to let you know about some upcoming events. We look forward to seeing you in person in the Canopy building on February 24th to learn more about Charlotte's history and how key decisions have influenced the city's growth and development, and how race and ethnicity have played a role in these decisions. The event will be at the association with registration and check-in beginning at 9:30 a.m. Register and learn more at canopyrealtor.com. Another exciting event is fellow realtor Danielle Edwards. She was chosen as one of the 6 community and civic leaders to participate in Charlotte Ballet's upcoming Dancing with the Stars Challenge. What does that mean for us? All the proceeds that Danielle raises will be split 50-50 between Charlotte Ballet and the Canopy Housing Foundation. The foundation is dedicating these funds to homeless initiatives and will work with local service organizations to utilize the funds for lasting impact. You can vote by donating in any amount. $1 equals 1 vote, or purchasing a ticket from the Saturday, March 4th event. Visit gala.charlotteballet.org for more information. Spring will be here before we know it, and so will Realtors Care Day. It's one of my favorite events of the year, and volunteer registration is now open for Friday, April 21st for Realtors Care Day. Look for the registration for Realtors Care Day on canopyrealtors.com to sign up today. So now I'd like to say how much we appreciate and thank our 2 sponsors that we have today. First, a quick video from TR Lawing.
The road from licensure to earning money can be a long one, but we can put money in your pockets tomorrow. TR Lawing Realty pays a rental referral fee whenever you send us a tenant who rents one of our vacancies anywhere in our 12-county region. For more than 60 years, TR Lawing Realty has been the Charlotte region's premier full-service residential property manager. By managing the details, we help individuals invest in real estate. And we provide free advice to fellow realtors. That's right, no matter which firm you are with, we can work together. You make the sale, and we will provide the long-term management services and even pay you a referral fee for the new account. All of our vacancies are on Canopy MLS and have Supra lock boxes. So remember TR Lawing Realty for property management services.
And next up, I want to welcome in person Melissa Kula from First National Bank to share some information with us. Welcome, Melissa. Thank you for being here and for your sponsorship.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. I'm very excited to share a couple of our programs with you that we have recently rolled out in mortgage to help in this market and to help those buyers who are finding it a little more difficult to achieve homeownership to ultimately achieve those dreams that they have. So our homeownership program is our homeownership and our homeownership plus program are both there. We have a grant that goes along with both of these programs. It's up to $5,000 to go towards the loan closing costs, and that's from the bank, from First National Bank directly. Our minimum credit score is 620, and we also allow borrowers to utilize these programs at 100% financing if they so wish. Our Homeownership Plus is our newest product, and we can actually go up to conforming loan limits with that. So if you're interested in learning more about these programs, or you might have a buyer that you think would benefit from these programs, I really encourage you to reach out to me. I represent the bank for this program in North and South Carolina, so I can work with buyers in both states if you operate in both states. So thank you again for having me here today. I wish you all the best of luck in your endeavors, in your business throughout 2023. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We really appreciate that and great information for our buyers. So now to our program. Dr. Jessica Lautz is Deputy Chief Economist and Vice President of Research at the National Association of Realtors. The core of her research focuses on analyzing trends for both NAR members and housing consumers. Through management of surveys, focus groups, and data analysis, she presents new and innovative ways to showcase results. In 2022, Dr. Lautz was named a RISMedia Newsmaker in the influencer category. And in 2021, Dr. Lautz was named one of Housing Wire's Women of Influence. Welcome, Dr. Jessica Lautz, to the floor. And also, I just want to note before she gets started, we will hold all questions to the end. So if you will put those questions in Q&A, we will get to as many as possible once the presentation is done. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours, Dr. Lautz.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I can see there's a lot of people on, so no pressure for me at all, but I'm really excited that you're all here to talk about data on this Tuesday morning. So let's jump right in and look at some of the trends. So the first thing I'm going to say is a lot of this data is going to be national figures. So I wanted to just start out with what's going on in your local market, and I was able to pull that very easily from your website here. So looking at your local market, you are the local expert. You know your block, you know your zip code better than anyone else does, and you know your niche in real estate. But just looking at the data, what we can see here is that the national headlines of the sky is falling in real estate aren't necessarily applicable. The last 6 months have been incredibly hard when we think about the real estate market, when we think about the rise in interest rates, and how it has pushed out a lot of consumers from the marketplace, with interest rates going from 3% to 7% in just a few short months. And unfortunately, with that, we saw a lot of competition, a lot of multiple bid situations, a lot of people pushing up home prices pretty considerably. When we look at your market, though, we see that inventory is still incredibly tight. We see that new listings are still down from 2021. And we can see that home prices are still going up. So a lot of the headlines where home prices are negative, or we could see distressed sales in the marketplace, I don't see that when I look at these headline figures here, looking at your market. And of course, every local market is different, and your data actually goes into a much more granular level depending on where you actually live and work. When we look at the month supply, though, we can see it's just 1.6 month supply in 2022. That's incredibly tight. We know that 6.5 months supply would be actually a balanced market between buyers and sellers. So we're still really talking about a seller's market, even though we know that this is a harder market for home buyers today because of affordability challenges. And I'll give you some migration flow data of why I think this could be happening within your local area as well. When we look at home prices, we can see just a steady growth here from 2012 throughout the last year, with home prices topping a growth rate of 6.8% in your local market. So really talking about a high growth rate, higher than what we would see historically of 3 to 5% for home prices. So perhaps not the double digits that we had seen when we think about the amount of buyers who jumped into the market during the pandemic and migration flow patterns that really pushed home prices up into double digits, but still nearly 7% is still actually pretty strong. What I wanted to talk about when we look at the national scale here, and I suspect that this is also very much reflective of your local market too, just seeing some of the headline stats there in your local market, is that when we think about the market over the last year, March of 2022, we really saw a really fierce market where those bidding wars were happening. A lot of people knew, they were wise, they were savvy, they were using their experts in the market. Their realtors and mortgage brokers were telling them rates are going to increase. And in fact, they did. And we saw that because of that, there was so much competition that we had 5.5 offers for every home that was listed. That is the highest that we've recorded looking back to 2015. So really thinking about pretty steep competition in the marketplace. Right now, though, when we think about this market, December of 2022, that's the latest data we have here, we can see that it's about 2 offers for every home that's listed. And you can see the historic here average. This is right in line with what we would expect in a normal market. So thinking more in line with this, though, This is still a tight inventory market. And if that home is well priced, we know that there's probably even more interest in that property as it is still a tight inventory market. The other thing that I think it's important to note, just because we know that there's a lot of migration flow into your state, and with migration flow often comes investors or vacation buyers, people who may actually think, you know what, I'm going to stay here a couple weeks out of the year. Maybe that's the Asheville market, or stay here even a month with hybrid work settings and remote work settings. It's allowed a lot of that type of activity. And we can see that there's no strict definition anymore between a vacation property and an investor. So when we think about that, we know that there's a lot of people who Airbnb or VRBO their property, and that allows them to have that income generation from that property while they're not physically using it. We know when we think about January of last year, so about a year ago, we had the highest share of vacation buyers and small investors coming in, mom and pop investors. We also had the lowest inventory we've ever recorded back at NAR since 1999. So when we have the lowest inventory of really anything, we're going to see a lot of investors come into that marketplace. And so we did see them come in. Right now, we're back towards the historic norm. We still don't have a lot of inventory. We have slightly more than we did a year ago. So right now we see it at 16% of the market. One of the things that's important to note is often when we think about mom and pop investors, we think about vacation buyers, we also think about all cash. Certainly true that more of them are paying all cash for these properties. Some of them might be taking out mortgages, but we know when we think about overall the entire real estate market right now, consistently what we're seeing is about a quarter of the market is paying all cash, regardless of whether they're an investor or not. And so as there's a lot of people paying all cash, they may not be influenced by these higher mortgage rates, and that really may not be a factor for them at all. Though we do know that interest rates have ticked down, hopefully we'll see more inventory materialize, because otherwise the spring market, in all honesty, it could be quite difficult, as we know that more home buyers, this will allow them to open the credit box. So we really do need that inventory to support these buyers coming in. One of the things that I think is really, really important right now is just there's a lot of misinformation out there when we talk about the housing market. I'm seeing a lot of Instagram reels and TikTok videos and just headlines that aren't really reflective of your local market, but it's not really reflective of a national housing market either, to tell you the truth. We're seeing a lot of stuff about there could be distressed sales coming into the marketplace. I don't necessarily see it. And the reason why is because home prices continue to go up. It is very possible that someone could be in a situation where they do have a job loss, where they do have a death in the family that's unexpected, and they have a property there, and that property may need to sell. That being said, because home price growth has been so steep in the last couple of years, especially with double-digit price appreciation, we just don't expect that there is going to be this wave of distressed sales. And if you think about the typical homeowner has been in their home for 10 years. They have $210,000 in housing equity. So with that housing equity, it's unlikely that they would be in that scenario. When we look at this graph right now, what I'm showing you here is that just 1% of realtors are working with distressed sellers in the last month, in comparison to looking back at 2009, where about half were. And there was a question in the chat about in the Q&A here. Here, I'm talking about all national numbers. So I don't have local figures on this. I wasn't able to find that. So moving forward throughout this presentation, unless it's noted, I'm talking about national stats here. So one of the things that is happening right now when we think about the housing market is we really are in a new housing paradigm. It's certainly not 6 months ago, but it's certainly not the last year either, the last 2 years when we think about the housing market. But it's very consistent what is happening right now. We have tight lending standards. It is very hard to obtain a mortgage right now if we think about having high credit, having a lot of money in reserves, having a solid debt to income ratio. You have to be able to prove your income, as opposed to no doc loans that were certainly out there if we think about the housing market during the boom period. We also have incredibly low housing inventory. Your market is not alone because of the migration flow into your area. I know that's eating up a lot more inventory than perhaps some areas of the country. But if we think of the country overall, we're short 6.5 million homes. And every area is unique and different in the reasons why, but there has really been a lack of building over the last decade. In the last couple of years, we have heard of home builders ramping up. They're pulling back from the housing market as interest rates went up. They have an expensive product and they have to have a bottom line there as well. When we're hearing from builders, they're talking about all kinds of problems then bringing products into market, whether it was the supply crisis that we had seen for basically every good over the last couple of years, whether it was labor issues, whether it was density restrictions within local areas and the lack of building of multifamily units, which we really do need as well. So a lot of builders are running into a lot of complications. And so unfortunately, we didn't see those products be put into the market. Because of that, what has happened is not only this push on home prices and bidding wars that happened with a lot of people coming into the market who didn't expect to, but also we know even for rental properties over the last year, we saw bidding wars for those. People who wanted to enter into the home buying market, suddenly in the summer, they couldn't because home prices had gone up so dramatically. We're back in the rental market and they said, well, if I'm going to rent, I want to rent the nicest unit I can, and I'm willing to pay more than even the listed rental price for that property. So really seeing this frenzy in the marketplace that even translated into the rental market. When we think about the housing market and this low inventory, I think it's really important to note demographics and just the shape that plays as well. And I'm going to talk about some of this when we talk about older buyers and millennials and everyone in between, which is the Gen Xers. When we talk about demographics, we have to note that there are a lot of young adults coming into the housing market right now who are trying to find their first property at the same time that a lot of seniors are aging in place, and they want to stay put in their single family homes, and absolutely they should be able to do so and have the comfort to do so as they age in place, as they have their bonus years. A term I'm hearing a lot right now in the media is the bonus years of 70s and 80s. People are living healthier and longer lives, and they want to stay put, and they absolutely should. And so we're seeing that this is really crunching the inventory crisis even more, as well as traditionally we had seen people in their 70s and 80s move in with family, move into nursing homes. We just don't see that trend right now. Moving forward, as we look about what's coming next, I think it's important to note just the last couple of years here. So we're going to take a look at what home sales have done on a national scale. And again, this is national data, but we don't forecast on a local level. And so I just want to give you the national overview here and then the national forecast. And you can reflect on that down to your local market, your block and your zip code and such. When we think about this, what we're looking at here, all of the blue and green has already happened. The green, obviously, it was very unusual. There were a lot of people who jumped into the housing market because of the pandemic, because of remote work trends, because of hybrid work trends, because they wanted to be closer to friends and family. And so there was a lot of people who moved during the last couple of years because they suddenly had the ability to do so. And so we saw them jump into the housing market needing bigger spaces, wanting bigger spaces, having those remote work trends, allowing them to move further and further distances. And I'll show you some data on that. And so we can see that 2020 and 2021 were incredibly unusual years in the housing market. 2022, unfortunately, the first half of the year was quite good, actually, as we saw a lot of buyers in the market still, rates were still low. But unfortunately, as we saw in the middle of the year and onwards, home sales have had a significant contraction. Activity really being more reflective of 2014 in the housing market as opposed to the last 2 years. 2023, we do expect that home sales will continue to contract over the next year. So looking at the actual data here, and looking at the expectation into 2023, the expectation is that home sales will be down 7%. Now in 2022, they were actually down closer to 18%. So looking at that in comparison, we also expect that home price growth will be flat. Now, in your local area, we're continuing to see positive home price growth. So this may not be reflective of your local area. And in fact, our chief economist, Lawrence Yoon, expects that half of markets in the US, home price growth will be reflective of similar markets to yours, where we do see positive home price growth, where half of markets we will actually see negative. So we really can see just that mix there. If we look at this overall on a national scale in 2022, home price growth was up 10%. Year before that, nearly 17%. So really talking about a very strong price appreciation again. Into 2024, mortgage rates are expected to be down. We do expect stronger home sales activity and positive price growth as well. All right, so I want to talk about those longer moves. I've hinted at this a lot, but I think there's some data here that really does show what's happening within these local areas in the migration flow that I think really you may reflect on and think of. One of the things that is happening with all of this, and I think is pretty interesting, is that there's still a section of the marketplace, 6% in the last month. We don't have a long timeline on this. We only started this right when the pandemic started in April of 2020. But when we look at this timeline, what we can see, there's still a pretty significant portion of the market that is purchasing their home physically sight unseen. They're relying on you as that realtor to show them that home, whether that's a virtual tour or they're walking through and they're FaceTiming you. You're telling them what that home smells like and what it sounds like. Is there a train track that I can't see on that map? What is behind that door that I can't see in this virtual tour that isn't being shown in the photos? And you're relaying that to the client. One of the reasons this is happening is because we do still have longer moves happening, but part of this is because that limited inventory situation. Someone may not be able to jump on a flight from DC. Maybe they can't jump on in the car and actually get there before that home is going to be under contract. Maybe they have a work trip. Maybe they're on vacation. Who knows? Baseball game may come as a priority. And so they can't get there. And unfortunately, we are seeing this activity. I think I'm saying unfortunately because I know that this really does change the relationship that you're having with that client. It's putting a lot of pressure on agents right now to really talk about that home. So this is a pretty messy map, and I want to show you this and really give you time to reflect here. When we look at this, what we're looking at here is really people who are moving into areas and moving out of areas. So the red and orange figures here are people really moving out of these areas. Within your local areas, we saw a lot of movers to there. And in fact, when we think about the Carolinas overall, really second only to Florida and Texas markets. We see a lot of migration flows as people were moving to the Sunbelt states, but really since the very beginning of the pandemic, back in 2020, when we first started looking at this information, what we saw is that people were moving into your state. And this is a continuation of migration patterns that we've been seeing, but it's really an acceleration of this, that we were seeing this pre-pandemic, and now we certainly are seeing it into the pandemic and perhaps post-pandemic at this point as well, as people are moving to Sunbelt states. We know that there's a lot of positive job growth within these areas, but we also know that people are seeking positive tax environments. They're looking for better weather. And as they have these moves, these long distance moves, it really is reflected in the data as we look at this. So this is actually using as the red spot on the North Carolina map, the inbound move rate. So anything that's red here, we're actually seeing migration flow out of. So we're seeing more people move out of those areas than into those areas. So this is using USPS data. One of the things that I think is important to note is because it's USPS change of address data, that this includes both people who are purchasing homes and people who are renting properties. It also could include, when we think about rental properties, long distance or long-term rentals, but also short-term rentals. So if you're staying in an Airbnb in a month, but you want to get your mail, you could be using a change of address here as well. So it's encompassing of everyone who's really having these moves. What's important to note is that the Carolinas really do have the sea of blue here. If we look at the red spots that are really pretty dark red, we can see New York, We can also see really California, Oregon, Washington, as we think about affordability and really becoming a very big issue within those areas as well. So moves out of those areas were certainly happening into 2022. If we look at where people are moving precisely, I think this really does drill down. I have to personally say, I will give this caveat here for this particular slide. This is self-reported data. So this is not using census data or USPS move data, linking back to zip codes where we really can track precisely where those locations are. So if someone's saying that they're moving from a city to a small town, they may actually be reflecting on the fact that they're moving from New York City to Nashville, where we all know that Nashville is not a small town. So just giving that caveat as we look at this slide here. But I think regardless of that, what we can take away is that small towns had significant growth in 2022, jumping to 29% of movers moving into those areas. Rural areas, 19%, and that has jumped from 12% the year before. So really seeing these migration flows into less dense areas from more dense areas. What also really drives this home is that the distance moved had gone traditionally from 1989 to 2021 from just 10 to 15 miles that was moved, and now it's jumped to 50 miles. So people are moving a much longer distance as well. So not only are they thinking about, I want to be in a small town or rural area, but they're also moving further out from their location that they have been in the past in a pretty considerable way. If we think about only repeat buyers who are out there, when we look at repeat buyers, we actually see that they're moving a median distance of 90 miles. So really almost double what we're seeing for overall. What I think is really important when we think about that is the relationship that the realtor has with that client. Because that realtor is that local expert. They're the ones who are talking about and really do know that local area. They know the coffee shops, they know the walkability, they know the neighborhood amenities, they know that neighborhood in a way that that buyer does not know at all. If I'm thinking about 50 or even 90 miles away from where I live, there is no way that I would be that local expert. I do not know that area, and I would be relying on that local expert to really be my guide and show me and teach me about that in a way that I think realtors are doing at this time. I want to talk a few slides here about millennials. I know that it's kind of everyone's favorite hated hot topic, but I think that this is really important when you think about the housing market, because it is more than 40% of home buyers today. They're a really significant portion, and they span a very wide age range now. So we're thinking about young 20s all the way up to 42 years old. So as we think about that massive generation, we know that their preferences could be quite different. So if you're thinking about a 42-year-old versus someone who's in their mid-20s, they're going to need different things from their home. They're going to have different preferences, and they're going to have a different amount of buying power as well. So jumping in and looking at this data, I'm going to back it out. And so this is not looking at home buyers, but rather this is looking at the US population. When we look at the US population, what we can see here is the little pandemic babies born in the last year represented by the green. And with mortality rates, unfortunately, we do see that the grays are getting shorter and shorter. So there's fewer of them than there are for other individuals in the US. Smack dab in the middle of this is this blue, and the blue is the millennial generation. And as we look at this, we can just visually see that they are the largest generation, definitely larger than Gen Zers and definitely larger than Gen Xers. What's really important here when we look at this chart and when we think about housing inventory is the red bar. The red bar is the median age of a first-time home buyer at 36 years old. So as we think about that 36-year-old, they're going to have different buying preferences, certainly. But as we think about the inventory crisis, if we look just past those 36-year-olds, we can see between the ages of about 26 to 32 years old is the biggest population in the US. So if you walk down the street and you ask people their ages, it is the most common age to be between those ages in the US. When we think about Gen Xers, I will give a couple notes here on them. They are in the peak of their careers. So thinking about someone who's 42, 43 to about 56 years old, they are likely to have a lot of family pressures though. So thinking about older adults who maybe needed caregiving, so moving back into their home or moving into their home. We may be thinking about kids who are over the age of 18 who have gone to college and are boomeranging back or just not leaving. They may have kids under the age of 18 as well. So thinking about a lot of generations within that household. When we think about baby boomers, and I'm going to give you some slides on this, I'm not going to focus too much attention at this point. But what I do want you to note here is that the youngest boomer is 57 years old. So in the next 3 years, we're really going to be talking about all baby boomers over the age of 60. So if they're not in a retirement, they are approaching retirement sometime soon. So really thinking about this generation too. Very large generation, a lot of buying power, and I'll show you some data on that, but really are seeing that. When we look at first-time home buyers here, this is quite important. We can see that the share of first-time home buyers has actually dropped to the lowest share that we ever have recorded in our data set that dates back to 1981 at just 26% of the market. When we look at this chart, it's really important to note that the last time we even saw it near this low was back in the 1980s when we had double-digit interest rates and we were in the midst of a recession. So a very different home buying market than what we see today. What becomes really important too when we think about young buyers is that their age has gone up to the highest that we ever have recorded it at 36 years old. And as we think about someone who's 36, that is going to be a different home buying preference than what we have traditionally seen that first-time home buyer age. And that's ranged between about 28 and 33 for the entire data set before this last year. So really seeing this all-time high. On a personal level, it could certainly mean that they're missing out on that housing equity over that significant period of time, that they have not been a home buyer, they've been a renter. We can also think about all of the hurdles that have held them back from homeownership, that low inventory environment, the rising home prices, rising interest rates in recent months. All of those are holding back these first-time home buyers. And then things outside of the housing market, such as the rise in rents, student loan debt. Certainly those are hurdles as well in holding back these buyers and their ability to save for that down payment. We also see here, and I think this is really important to note, that the repeat buyer has now gone to an all-time high age of 59 years old. And as we think about someone who's 59 versus someone who's 36, which was the typical repeat buyer back in 1981, their home buying preferences are going to be completely different. So thinking about someone who, if they're not in retirement, is thinking about retirement in the next few years, someone who may have kids who are long out of their household by now, who may be in college or could even be on to their first home. We're also thinking about someone who is thinking about their neighborhood preferences in different ways. So perhaps thinking about those neighborhood amenities and what they can enjoy on the weekends versus their commute time, that would be less of a factor to that 59-year-old as well. One of the big tropes that we hear when we hear about young adults is we hear a lot of the hard times that they're having out there right now. And that is certainly absolutely true in entering homeownership and thinking about their age at an all-time high, the share of first-time homebuyers at an all-time low. And one of the things that has happened really as a result in the last couple of years of these financial pressures, of the rise in rent, the difficulty entering homeownership, but also because of the pandemic, I think as well, as we think about people having the ability to work remote and not having to rent an apartment in a city center, is the ability to move home. And so we have seen the highest share of young adults, 25 to 34, actually did move home in the last couple of years. It was nearly 18% of young adults living at home. Right now, it's ticked down in the last couple of years, and this could be actually encouraging for the housing market as we think about potentially first-time home buyers. One of the things that we know is happening right now is there's less competition in the marketplace. So we're not seeing 5.5 offers for every home that's listed like last year. We're seeing about the average of about 2. So now could be that opportunity for these buyers who are first-time home buyers who have an FHA loan, a VA loan, to enter into the housing market in a way that last year they would not have been able to because of just that fierce competition. As they lived at home, a lot of these young adults, I think, saved for a down payment. They were able to pay off their student loan debt or their car, and they were able to actually get their debt to income ratio in check. And the reason why I'm saying that is when you look at the prior living arrangement of recent first-time home buyers, 27% of them actually moved from their family member's home into home ownership. So they did not rent an apartment first. And so this may have allowed them to save for that down payment in a way that if they rented, it just would not have been possible. And we see a pretty substantial jump. So the year before, it was just 21% who had that prior living arrangement. If we look back at 1989, it was nearly half of that at 15%. So really seeing a very dramatic change here in what we're looking at. I want to talk about a few of the demographic changes that we are seeing right now in the data as well. Let me jump in. So one of the big things that we are seeing is the household composition of home buyers has really changed. So if we think about first-time home buyers overall, we have more single adults. We have more single women who are entering into the housing market, and we have more unmarried couples. We also have more roommates if we think about the housing market today compared to 1985. I think this is really striking. So some of it is because we know that marriage rates are down. We also know that people are getting married later in life. So if there's first-time home buyers out there, we see a lot of single women saying, you know what? I'm going to save for this home on my own. I want to build this housing equity. I want this long-term investment for my future. And so she's jumping into the housing market by herself. And that's great. She has a little nest egg for her to move forward on. And if she gets married, perhaps they have two properties. We also see a lot of unmarried couples in the marketplace, and perhaps they'll get married later. Who knows? But we are seeing 18% of the housing market for first-time home buyers right now is unmarried couples, the highest share we've recorded. The other one I really want to pull out here is this roommate category. It's 5% of first-time home buyers overall. And I think it's pretty interesting. So it's not a huge share, certainly, but it has jumped, and we have not seen the share this high before. I do think it speaks to people saying, you know what, I'm not partnered up right now, but I do want to buy a house. And so renting a home, I'm not earning that housing equity. I'm not having that long-term investment for my future. And so if we purchase this home together, we can pool our incomes. So thinking about housing affordability, we suddenly have dual incomes to be able to purchase this house together. And we already have companionship built in this roommate situation. So people are moving forward with this home purchase as a roommate. And I think this is an interesting trend here to watch as well. The other trend that we're seeing here with demographics is that we are seeing that there's fewer people who have children in tow who are purchasing homes. Now, there's a couple of factors that play here. One is that we do see this rise in age for repeat buyers, and we see more repeat buyers. So certainly they could have kids, but those kids are long out of the household at this point. We also know that for first-time home buyers, it's harder to save. And so perhaps those who are entering the housing market are less likely to have children because they're not having to pay for daycare. And someone who is having to pay $2,000 per month for one child in daycare is going to have a very hard time saving for a home and is less likely to enter into the housing market. We also know that birth rates are down. So another factor at play here as well. So just fewer people have kids and there's more child-free households overall. So all of those factors at play has translated into essentially 31% of the home buying market having children under the age of 18, and that's down from 58% back in 1985. Now, with this, I would say that there's a few things that we should think about when we think about the housing market. One is going to be that neighborhood preference. That's certainly going to change as well. So if we think about the need for that perfect school or the convenience to schools, maybe that's down on the priority list. We also know that it's going to upend the amount of moves that buyer may have. So thinking about a growing family, they're going to need to move to accommodate that new child, or thinking about having that neighborhood preference, but also the size of the home that buyer actually needs as well. So thinking about having that extra bedroom, may not be that child's bedroom. It may actually be a home office or a den. Something else could be a priority there as well. So the last demographic one I'm going to give you is a much later note, but we are absolutely seeing it in the data, is the really pet adoptions have absolutely been up throughout the pandemic. People wanted companionship, they wanted something to do, and a lot of babies are fur babies, and they are deciding where that home is being purchased. 19% of buyers are factoring their pet into the location of where they're purchasing. So thinking about the dog park, walkability, convenience to pet grooming, all of those being factors for people who have pets. And if we think about young millennial buyers and we think about single women, which are two growing segments of the housing market, we can actually see this is actually more than a quarter of those buyers are factoring their pet into their home purchase. We also did a survey of realtors, and we found that 18% of y'all have worked with a client who's moving solely because they have a new pet. And so this is really a big factor for them. They have to account their new pet into their home purchase. So maybe they're moving to a house with a fenced yard because they were in an apartment before, or maybe they need a space for their cat litter boxes or need to have bigger windows. Who knows? Whatever that reason is, they're moving because of their pet. So it's certainly a factor that is driving the market right now. So senior buyers, I said I would get back to you all talking about seniors, and I have to say today's seniors are absolutely different than what we have seen in the past. So we have to be thinking about these individuals really as a different generation of buyers than we have seen. When we look at them, there's some really unique attributes here. So we know that they're following their grandbaby. Maybe they're moving 2 states away so that they can be closer to where their grandchildren are, to be closer to their adult children. We also know that downsizing is essentially out. They're buying these newer, nicer spaces. If they can find a more affordable home, they're certainly willing to make that trade into a more affordable property, but it does not translate necessarily into a smaller space. So they really do want to have that square footage to be able to entertain, to be able to share that space with their family. We also know that they're not necessarily planning on moving. So really thinking about a senior buyer saying, I'm planning on being here for 15 to 20 years. That's a pretty long period of time. And so really thinking about perhaps aging in place. And with that, we may need to be thinking about, does this home need to be retrofitted later on? Do we need to be thinking about wider entryways? Do we need to be thinking about lower countertops or handlebars in the restroom just for safety purposes? According to Harvard, just 2 to 3% of housing stock in America is actually A-OK to age in place with these features installed. So thinking about your contractors, and do they have the ability to put these features in for a future buyer who you may be working with? They may reach out back to you and say, do you have a contractor? I don't know who to contact in this new location that I've moved very far from my past place. We also know, I talked about roommates when I talked about first-time buyers, but we're also seeing roommates for senior buyers. So we're seeing companionship, affordability, both of those needs being met with senior buyers. And we know that there's a lot of older women who are single. And so they're looking at this as well and saying, why not? And so a lot of people, as we look at the senior generations, are actually purchasing with roommates. The other thing that I think is really important here when we talk about seniors is they have money. They have a lot of housing equity. If they are moving from their past home, they have savings and they are putting that into their new property. So when we think about all the bells and whistles of a new property, it could be new build, but it also could be an existing property that has the bells and whistles. Thinking about smart home features, the tech features, green features, all of these we traditionally think about young adults, millennials with. We're actually seeing that senior buyers are purchasing homes with these features because they have the ability to do so, but also it could make aging in place a little easier if you're telling a Google device or something to turn on the lights in the evening or turn them off. It just makes life a little easier, and who doesn't want that as well? One of the things that I think is important to note when we talk about multi-generational households is to talk about seniors as well. These things really do go hand in hand today. So I talked about young adults moving back, But the other reason that people do buy multi-generational households is for seniors to live there as well. So whether that's caretaking, whether that's spending time with, both of these things are happening. We have seen multi-generational homes is actually back up near a historical high. It's at 14% of all buyers right now purchasing multi-generational homes. It's likely a Gen Xer who is purchasing that home. And really the number one reason for any multi-generational buyer to purchase a home like that is for an aging senior to move in. So thinking about really caretaking is happening, but I also have to note that for some buyers who are purchasing this multi-generational home, it actually could be caretaking that is daycare as well. So perhaps the grandparent is helping with childcare as opposed to sending that kid to after school programs or to childcare. It really could be caretaking in both of those scenarios as well that could be happening right now. All right, so I'm going to move topics completely here and just talk about tenure in home. We have seen tenure in home up to an all-time high now of 10 years that people are staying put. So really thinking about a very long length of time. We had seen historically that people move every 6 to 7 years, but after the Great Recession and then following that, we've just seen it elevated. And so people are staying put. Maybe it's because people are thinking of their home in different ways. So not that quick turn in equity and then move on to the next home. Maybe it's because they're moving further distances away. So if you're moving to a small town or an outer suburb and you're locking in a low interest rate, there's really no intention of moving anytime soon. But regardless, the reason people are staying put. When we look at recent buyers and what their expectations are in their new home, we also see that's really a pretty sizable length of time. But what I really want to pull out here on this chart is for first-time home buyers. We're actually seeing that their expected tenure in home is 18 years. When we look at this historically, it had been as low as 7 years that they expected to be there. And before that, and when we look at this over a length of time, it actually had been 10 years for a very long period of time. And now it's up to 18. So really thinking about this first-time home buyer, 36 years old, moving into this home, and perhaps they're moving into a small town or they're moving into a rural area. So there's really no need to move from that property. But this is important to note because this is a pretty dramatic change. What also to keep in mind here, though, is that if it's a repeat buyer or first-time home buyer, something in their life may change that could cause them to move, even if there isn't that intention of moving from that property. So maybe that is a growing family. Maybe that is a marriage or a divorce or a change in job. For a senior buyer, maybe that's someone who actually finally gets to retire and so they can move. Regardless the reason, that could happen later in their life as well. So while that expected tenure is pretty long, 15 to 18 years, it could actually be much sooner than that they are actually making that move. The agent role, I'm just going to give you a couple slides here, but I have to say it's incredibly positive what we're seeing. I do think that everyone's life as a realtor out there has been so much harder in the last couple of years. We see these long distance moves. We see people moving from their friends and family's house, which means they didn't even rent first. And so they're relying on you for all that information. We're seeing repeat buyers who've been in their house for 10 years and now they're making this move. So they're essentially almost a first-time home buyer too. So nothing about this has really made realtors' lives easier. But what we are seeing is that 9 in 10 buyers want to use and are using an agent in that home buying process. They want help finding that right home, but they need help with negotiations. They need help understanding that local area. And that's really where you come in to really tell them that information in a way that they may not get from anyone else and they can't get from anyone else. When we look at sellers, we do see that 9 in 10 are using sellers in that selling process. And we ask a follow-up question here because everyone has a different business model. And we ask, is it a full service agent? Is it someone who lists on the MLS? Is it something in between? And the full service agent is the most popular. People want help selling their home, but understanding now that they have to fix up their home for sale. They have to stage their home. They need to understand and they want virtual tours and videos and all of these bells and whistles, but they also need help pricing that home competitively, finding that qualified buyer, and then past that closing table, everyone for services, whether that is the mover, the painter, they are coming to you as that expert to really show them and guide them along that process. I want to just give one final note here. I did not talk about race and ethnicity throughout this presentation. It is important to note when we think about home buyers today that not everyone is created equal. We talked about the age of first-time home buyers going up considerably. We talked about first-time home buyers being really having a hard time in this housing market. They don't have housing equity to rely on. But one of the other things when we look at this is really the changing demographics of race. When we look at home buyers today and who can come into the housing market and who's really being left behind because of these financial considerations as well. So we are seeing a jump in white home buyers. 88% in the last year of home buyers are white. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is a drop in Black home buyers and in Asian home buyers. And certainly affordability is hitting home buyers who do not have housing equity in this really rough way. They're having a hard time entering the housing market. We also know that half of Black home buyers are traditionally first-time home buyers. So thinking about leaving behind first-time home buyers in this housing market just automatically means that we're unfortunately leaving behind Black home buyers. We also know that Black home buyers are less likely to have family help with their down payment. So we talked about first-time home buyers having that family help and living at home first, having that down payment transfer of wealth. And we unfortunately know that for Black home buyers, they're more likely to tap their 401k loan and to find their down payment that way than they are through that family intergenerational transfer of wealth. So seeing these home buyers left behind is really pretty devastating when we look at this data this year. So that is all that I have for you for my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. But my slides will be sent out, so you will have those, and there are citations at the bottom of all of the slides here as well. But thank you so much. I am happy to take any questions that you may have.
Dr. Lautz, thank you so much for sharing such an incredible presentation with us today that was full of nuggets that we can all take and use in our day-to-day business. We have, I think, answered all the questions, or you answered all of your own questions as we scroll through. It was very easy. Someone had asked about is the median age of a first-time home buyer really 36? And your next slide showed, yes, it is, which I think was surprising to a lot of us. And you shared a lot of great information. I am not any other feedback in the chat beyond such a great presentation. Jason Brown's asking, what percentage of homes were bought by hedge fund groups? Is that something that you can answer?
Not really, no. And I will say that's a really hard data point to get at. So I know that there was a lot of headlines. There was a lot of talk about that in the media, I want to say 6 months ago. And we tried to, measure that. And the closest way that we could get to a measurement of that is to essentially include all LLCs, which I know many realtors out there are saying, wait a second, I'm an LLC. So it's a really hard number to get at, unfortunately, in the data. I don't know, honestly, if it's gone up or if it's gone down because we don't have a good measurement of it, but I know it's happening. So not a great answer, I know, but I wish I could answer that more precisely.
Okay, as I'm looking at our Q&A board, everyone is saying thank you and fascinating and lots of great comments scrolling through there. So we really appreciate you being our guest today, Dr. Lautz, and everyone. You will find this recording and a copy of her slides at canopyrealtors.com. Give us about 5 to 7 days and it'll all be posted there. We hope you all have a wonderful day, and we really appreciate you joining us for such an incredible presentation. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Lautz.